something killed it, and it wasn't age. The big boy produced 7,000 horsepower and 135,000 pounds of tractive effort, the most powerful steam locomotive ever built. It was Union Pacific's undisputed giant, hauling 6,000-ton trains straight over the Rockies. Yet by 1962, every single one had been pulled from service. Not because they broke down, because a smaller, quieter machine moved the same freight at roughly a third of the cost per ton mile. To understand how Union Pacific's greatest locomotive lost that war, you have to see what made it seem unbeatable. Raw numbers never told the whole story, but they built the legend. The big boy was a machine that seemed to rewrite the rules of railroading by brute force alone. 7,000 horsepower at the drawbar, 135,000 pounds of tractive effort, a single locomotive stretching more than 132 feet from coupler to coupler, weighing in at over 1.2 million pounds with its tender. On paper, nothing else in the world could touch it. The American locomotive companies build sheets from 1941, read like the blueprints for a battleship. A 4884 wheel arrangement, twin sets of massive driving wheels, a firebox big enough to burn through 30 tons of coal on a single run, and a boiler that could hold 22,000 gallons of water. Every number seemed to dare the landscape to stop it. But the myth was not just forged in the shop. It was proven on the rails, especially in the spring of 1943, when a big boy made its most storied climb over the Wasatch Range. The dispatcher's report from that day is still preserved in the Union Pacific archives. A 6,100-ton freight train loaded with war material departed Ogden, Utah at dawn. The grade ahead rose 1.14% for nearly 30 miles, the kind of climb that had forced older engines to double up or stall out entirely. Not this time. The big boy, running solo, kept the consist moving at a steady 30 miles per hour, never once needing a helper. Crew logs described the cab as a furnace, the fireman's hands blackened by coal, the engineer's eyes fixed on the pressure gauge as the summit loomed. 3 hours and 45 minutes later, the train crested the pass, right on schedule. No breakdowns, no delays. Just the relentless rhythm of 73-inch drivers pounding out mile after mile. That run became the stuff of company lore. Photographs from the era show the big boy perched atop the Wasatch, smoke curling skyward, a string of loaded hoppers trailing behind like boxcars on a child's model railroad. The numbers from that day: 6,100 tons, 1% grade, one locomotive, were passed down in shop talk and railroad newsletters as proof that Union Pacific's crown jewel could outmuscle anything thrown at it. For a time, it seemed unstoppable. The big boy could move more freight over steeper grades with fewer delays than any engine before it. Its performance on the mountain runs set a new standard, and the crews who ran them became legends in their own right. The myth of the unbeatable steam giant took root in these moments, and for years, nothing else on the rails looked even close. But as the numbers piled up, so did the questions. The big boy's mechanical dominance was clear, but the story behind its eventual downfall was already beginning to take shape, hidden in the margins of those same records. Every run demanded a choreography of stops and starts that few outside the railroad ever witnessed. The big boy's power came at a price, measured not just in coal and water, but in lost minutes and labor that never showed up in the headlines. Timetables for the Cheyenne to Ogden corridor listed 6 scheduled water towers, each one a mandatory halt, 8 minutes to fill the tender, 4 more for coal, 12 minutes gone at every stop. On a typical mountain run, that meant about 75 minutes lost simply to keep the beast fed and watered, even before counting the time spent on brake tests and crew changes at each halt. This relentless need for fuel and water shaped every aspect of daily operations. The fireman's world was a blur of levers and gauges, his hands slick with sweat and coal dust, eyes darting between the stoker and the water glass. Each summit climb meant shoveling 40 pounds of coal a minute, hour after hour, with no margin for error. The engineer perched beside him kept one hand on the throttle, the other on the pressure gauge, watching for the first sign of a drop that could spell trouble. Behind the scenes, Cheyenne's steam shops became a second home for these crews. The main shop's 12-ton crane and 70-foot turntable were built specifically for the big boys' bulk, and the roster of equipment ran to pages: hydraulic presses for frame bolts, boiler testing rigs, racks of spare superheater tubes lined up like organ pipes. Fitters and boilermakers worked in shifts, logging long hours on routine inspections, firebox repairs, and the endless cycle of lubrication and valve adjustments. It took a 3-person crew to run the locomotive on the line, but a small army to keep it ready for the next assignment. Every trip ended with a ritual. The locomotive rolled into the roundhouse, still hissing and hot, where a team descended for a post-run inspection. Any sign of a leaky tube or a worn bearing meant days of downtime. Some failures called for a full boiler washout, others for an axle box rebuild, a process that could sideline a big boy for more than a week. Shop logs from 1946 show repair orders stretching 16 days for a single cracked crown sheet, with 8 workers logging more than 200 hours to bring the engine back to life. The spectacle of the big boy masked a reality of constant maintenance and support. Water towers, coaling stations, and ash pits dotted the landscape, each one a reminder of the infrastructure steam demanded. For every mile of mainline thunder, there were hours of preparation, refueling, and repair. The legend grew in the public's imagination, but in the records of the Cheyenne shops and the hands of the crew, the burden of steam was always visible. The machine's reputation for strength was real, but so was the cost of keeping it moving. In the years after World War II, Union Pacific's boardroom began to fill with a new kind of calculation. The railroad's legendary steam fleet, crowned by the big boy, still dominated the company's public image, but the real power was shifting behind closed doors. Between 1947 and 1956, Union Pacific quietly acquired hundreds of diesel-electric locomotives, EMD FTCs, GP9s, SD7s, adding them to the roster in growing waves. Each new diesel arrived with a promise: lower maintenance, longer range, and the ability to run day and night without the endless cycle of water stops and firebox repairs. By the spring of 1958, the numbers had become impossible to ignore. Minutes from the March board meeting record a decisive step. Union Pacific would move to a diesel-first policy. No more steam engines would be ordered. Existing steam units, no matter how iconic, would be retired as soon as the numbers justified it. The directive was signed by Harold E. Mason, Vice President of Operations and Chair of the newly formed Motive Power Transition Task Force. Mason's group was charged with a single, unambiguous goal: accelerate the diesel transition and deliver a leaner, more reliable motive power fleet by 1962. The task force operated with a cold logic that left little room for sentiment. Internal memos from Mason's office outlined the new priorities: standardize parts, cut down on specialized labor, and eliminate the sprawling infrastructure that steam required. The transition was not just about engines, it was about the entire way the railroad managed its business. Diesel units could be serviced at any division shop, swapped into consists at a moment's notice, and coupled together in multiple unit sets that made helper assignments obsolete. The old order included water towers, coaling stations, and dedicated steam shops, and it was now a liability. For the crews and shop workers who had built their lives around steam, the shift felt abrupt and impersonal. But the board's resolve was absolute. The diesel first policy was not a suggestion. It was a mandate backed by spreadsheets and cost projections, enforced by a task force that answered directly to the executive committee. Every new diesel delivered to the yard was another nail in the big boy's coffin, each one smaller, quieter, and less imposing than the giant it was meant to replace. Yet in the ledgers and maintenance logs, the diesel's quiet efficiency was impossible to deny. The legend of the big boy faced a new kind of rival, one that won not by spectacle, but by the silent arithmetic of operational reality. Availability numbers from the 1950s tell a blunt story. By 1958, the big boy class was in service just 62% of the time, while the new diesel electrics hovered at 94%. That gap was not just a matter of pride, it was a logistical crisis. Mean time between failures, spelled out as MTBF, offers another measure of the gulf. The big boy averaged only 950 miles between unplanned repairs by the end of the decade. A diesel, by comparison, could roll for 8,500 miles before anything forced it off the line. Each breakdown was not just an inconvenience. It triggered a cascade of lost hours and reshuffled schedules up and down the division. The maintenance burden was even more lopsided. For every 1,000 miles a big boy traveled, it demanded 340 man-hours of shop labor. Diesels, in the same stretch, needed just 48. That difference shaped the daily reality in Cheyenne's roundhouse. Mechanics worked in rotating shifts, crawling over boilers and under running gear, chasing leaks and fatigue cracks that seemed to multiply as the locomotives aged. A failure in a diesel, for example a traction motor, could be swapped out in a single shift. For a steam giant, a cracked crown sheet was a different story. 16 days out of service, 8 men on the job, more than 200 hours logged before the engine was cleared for duty again. Failure logs from 1950 to 1959 read like a litany of recurring trouble. Boiler tube leaks, superheater failures, frame bolt retightenings, each one a ticket to the back of the shop queue. The men who kept the big boys running became silent witnesses to the mounting toll. They watched as repair orders grew longer, parts inventories thinned, and the pool of experienced steam fitters shrank. In the end, the numbers on the shop floor became impossible to ignore. Reliability was not just slipping, it was collapsing. Every hour, a big boy sat cold on a siding, a diesel rolled past, ready for its next assignment. The arithmetic of downtime, labor, and lost miles left no room for debate. The legend was still alive in the public eye, but behind the scenes, the operational case for steam had already failed. Union Pacific's analysts, led by John D. Lyle, were not swayed by the spectacle of steam. Their motive power cost study, circulated in June 1960, reduced the debate to columns of numbers. The big boy, with all its muscle and drama, demanded 3 times the labor cost per ton-mile, 1.8 cents for every ton hauled. A diesel-electric, running quietly in the background, needed just 0.7 cents. The difference was not a rounding error. It was the margin between profit and loss on every mile of track. Fuel receipts from 1955 told an even starker story. For every 1,000 miles, a big boy burned through $560 in coal and water. The diesel, using a fraction of the energy, covered the same distance for $85. Even after accounting for the big boy's higher horsepower, the cost per ton-mile for fuel alone was triple. Maintenance logs, already swollen with repair orders, added to the tally. Every 1,000 revenue miles, the steam giant consumed 340 man-hours in the shop. A diesel needed only 48. The fuel, the overtime, the downtime, it all showed up in the bottom line. When Lyle's team aggregated the numbers, the result was impossible to ignore. The total cost of running a big boy came to 2.8 cents per ton-mile. A diesel electric, by comparison, delivered the same haul for just 1 cent. Capital costs told a similar story: $210 per horsepower for the steam engine, $165 for the diesel. The difference, multiplied across a fleet, translated into millions of dollars each year. The myth of steam's efficiency collapsed under the weight of its own accounting. The motive power cost study landed on the desks of Union Pacific's executive committee with the force of a final verdict. The headline numbers, meaning labor, fuel, and total cost, left no room for nostalgia. The railroad could not afford to keep the big boys running. The decision, when it came, was not sentimental. It was a direct response to the arithmetic of survival. The legend had met its match in the quiet, relentless logic of the ledger. On October 15, 1960, Union Pacific's executive committee gathered in Omaha. The agenda was brief but loaded: the future of the big boy steam locomotives. Around the table sat President Howard L. Marchand, Vice President of Operations Harold E. Mason, Chief Mechanical Engineer Charles R. McAllister, and John D. Lyle, the railroad's lead transportation economist. The motive power cost study, thick with spreadsheets and maintenance logs, lay open in front of them. Lyle's analysis left little to debate. The cost of keeping the big boys in service was nearly triple that of the diesel electrics already running the main lines. The discussion was direct. Every executive present had seen the numbers: labor costs, fuel bills, shop hours. Each figure chipped away at the legend of steam. For years, men like Mason and McAllister had overseen the big boys' triumphs and breakdowns, but the arithmetic of survival now outweighed sentiment. The committee reviewed the withdrawal plan. All remaining big boys would be pulled from revenue service no later than June 30th, 1962. There would be no exceptions. The vote was unanimous. No one dissented. The minutes, preserved in Box 3, Folder 10 of the company archives, record the resolution in plain language: withdraw the entire class, store, scrap, or donate as appropriate. The fate of the big boy was sealed in less than an hour, not by mechanical failure or public outcry, but by the cold certainty of the ledger. The decision was final. Orders went out to every division before the week was over. Steam for Union Pacific was finished. Orders moved faster than rumors. Within days of the boardroom vote, division managers received explicit instructions. Big boys were to be withdrawn from service, their fates logged in the disposition register. The 1959 collective bargaining agreement, hammered out with IAM Local 4, included a transition clause that promised a 50% wage premium to any fireman who retrained as a diesel engineer. That clause, once a bargaining chip, became a lifeline for hundreds of men whose skills had been forged in the heat of the steam era. Shop foremen posted new rosters. Crew assignments vanished overnight. The roundhouse at Cheyenne, once a hive of midnight repairs and shouted orders, fell quiet as the last steam calls faded from the schedule. By October 31st, 1961, 8 big boys had been transferred to museums, static reminders of a vanished world. The rest were stored, stripped of parts, and queued for the torch. Between 1962 and 1964, 17 locomotives were cut up for scrap, their numbers crossed out in the register, their hulks reduced to steel and memory. The men who had fired and fixed them watched the process with a mix of resignation and disbelief, their pride in the machine giving way to the reality of a system that now valued efficiency above all else. What had once seemed permanent was swept aside in less than 3 years, leaving only a handful of preserved giants and a workforce reshaped by the economics of diesel. In the end, the numbers left no room for legend. The diesel, smaller, quieter, almost invisible next to the big boy, proved ruthlessly efficient where spectacle once reigned. Today, progress still chooses winners not by grandeur, but by cold advantage. No icon, however mighty, outpaces the logic of change. The lesson remains: Even giants are no match for a better idea. What do you think? Is efficiency always worth the sacrifice?